When Narcissists Collide, Part 2. What is the dynamic when a lesser narcissist and a mid-range narcissist become entangled with one another? Briefly, the lesser is categorized by a lower level of cognitive function, low control threshold on the ignited fury, reduced levels of charm, and narrower stable of manipulations, and often chaotic life in terms of relationship, work, addictions and finance, and a greater propensity for physical violence. Upper lessers are often more intelligent, though not necessarily so, invariably are more financially successful. They may also have increased levels of charm. They similarly have a narrow stable of manipulations, but not as narrow as lower lesser or middle lesser. They can often be quite chaotic in their own behaviours. Despite being successful, they still have a low control threshold on the ignited fury. So there are some adjustments within there, but the general tenets stay applicable. The mid-range narcissist is passive-aggressive. They have increased charm and increased cognitive function generally compared to the lesser. They are also less likely to use physical violence, but instead rely far more heavily on silent treatments, pity plays, sulking. They seek sympathy, turn to others for assistance in manipulating individuals, doing so instinctively, and they have a wider range of manipulations to rely upon. Again, where there is lesser and mid-range, neither of these individuals know what they are, nor do they recognize their kind. How then do these two types of narcissists interact with one another? As an overarching philosophy, the interaction of the lesser and the mid-ranger is one of cat and mouse. There will be adjustments for the sub-schools, but where we're talking in terms of school against school, it is one of cat and mouse. Both, of course, are in the fight to control one another and to seek fuel, but they have different tools on hand to achieve this. The lesser will be the agent provocateur, with the mid-ranger playing the hard-done-to individual, although they will unleash their passive-aggressive manipulations, and where upper mid-range there will be more haughty behaviours and more polished arrogance. Within the familial narcissistic dynamic, of course, there is no seduction between the two as a consequence of the two individuals being brought together by reason of being related. Let us take the example of two adult sisters. The lesser will start by looking to draw fuel and assert control from the mid-range narcissist sister by competing with her. The lesser is likely to be envious of the mid-range sister, who may well be perceived as more accomplished and successful in terms of job, quality of home, spouse, social circle, looks, etc. The lesser will, of course, regard this success as an inherent criticism of the lesser and will thus be wounded. Control is threatened, fury ignites. The lesser sister cannot help but lash out at her mid-range sister and will do so by accusing her, for example, of having her nose stuck in the air, being Lady Muck, suggesting her achievements are not her own but those of other people, and so on. Anything is thrown at her in order to try and achieve the upper hand in the dynamic between the two. The aggression exhibited by the lesser sister towards the mid-range sister will provide the mid-range sister with some fuel, but it is a challenge, and therefore she has to reject this threat to her control and will invariably do so by pity play and sympathy symphonies, either from the aggressive lesser, but more usually from third parties, other members of the family, and will thus be asserting control in an indirect fashion. Thus, one can expect in the context of, say, a family gathering, the lesser will feel the need, driven by the instinctive response caused by their narcissism, to attack the mid-range sister, often with odd ad hominem insults such as, "You've put more weight on since the last time I saw you," or "I've a dress like that, it doesn't suit me either." If the lesser makes these comments in an angry or savage fashion, as well, additional fuel is provided. The narcissist, who is the mid-ranger, may respond directly or seek sympathy fuel from the non-narcissist third parties, or may even withdraw. If the mid-ranger responds in a hurt manner to the provocation, the lesser receives fuel and is receiving control. However, if the mid-ranger bleats, "Why are you always picking on me?" or "Leave me alone, why do you have to be so hateful?" the lesser's gaining fuel, but of course they're being questioned, so the challenge continues. They then feel a threat to the assertion of their control. If the mid-range sister responds with a silent treatment, then of course no fuel is provided, and in the circumstances, the lesser will pursue the mid-ranger to tackle that threat to control and to obtain fuel. The pursuit then will challenge the mid-ranger's sense of control, but will also provide her with additional fuel because the lesser sister becomes more and more annoyed and frustrated by the icy silence given to her by the mid-ranger. The mid-ranger will maintain the silent treatment, thus asserting control and drawing additional fuel, and once that has been addressed, may well then continue to speak to the lesser. The lesser is in a more disadvantaged position. They have been deprived of fuel because the sister, whose mid-range, was not responding in any way, and that failure to respond would wound the lesser. She is not receiving fuel, and her control is being threatened, and therefore she would keep going at her mid-range sister, provoking, insulting, shouting, etc., until somebody else intervenes or the lesser storms off and asserts control by withdrawal and seeks fuel elsewhere. If these two sisters, however, are in isolation, any interaction will soon descend into an argument, and the mid-ranger implementing a silent treatment in order to defend herself does not provide fuel to the lesser and threatens her control. The lesser will be forced to keep goading the mid-ranger, provoking her, trying to get fuel out of her, and as a way to assert control over her, until such time as this is achieved. And either the mid-ranger will break and respond by crying, providing fuel, or will be forced to move to active withdrawal by storming away, cursing the baby-like behaviour of her sister, and has her own temper tantrum. If the two sisters are with other family members, the mid-ranger will, first of all, turn to them for sympathy and garner their support, and thus in her world, it enables her to assert control indirectly over the behaviour of the lesser. She gains fuel from those third parties and has asserted control. This then, of course, is likely to descend into allegation and counter-allegation because the responses of the third parties will be witnessed by the lesser narcissist and will challenge her control. And therefore there will be descent in all manner of manipulations through triangulation, smearing, blame-shifting, projection and such like on an industrial scale. The mid-ranger will either sit in sulking silence, attempting to assert control, or slink away, again asserting control, with the lesser continuing to goad. If this provoking behaviour does not yield results, then the lesser sister will turn to the other members of the family for the fuel that ought to have been provided by the mid-range sister. What about in a social situation? When the two narcissists are friends, an interesting dynamic will occur. The lesser will see the more successful mid-ranger as not only a source of fuel, but also somebody who can provide residual benefits and character traits. Therefore, the lesser will be keen to seduce the mid-ranger, not knowing that he or she is a narcissist, as an inner circle friend, to assert control, gain fuel, character traits, and residual benefits. The mid-ranger will see the aggressive behaviour of the lesser as useful in terms of securing this person as a potential lieutenant and certainly a member of the coterie, and therefore will aim to seduce the lesser as a friend to become their own inner circle friend, who is then used for control, fuel, unlikely to be character traits but they could be there, and this clear residual benefit of being a hired gun to carry out the dirty work of the mid-ranger. The lesser, once having seduced the mid-range narcissist, will look to use the passive mid-ranger for the purposes of borrowing money, being available when nobody else might be to go out with, and generally extort the mid-ranger's assets. The mid-ranger will initially comply as part of their own seduction of the lesser, and will not see it as a threat to control, but rather something that has to be done in order to assert control over the lesser to gain what they want. It is when the mid-range narcissist expects to cash in on their generosity that their problems begin. So far, the mid-ranger has, in effect, acceded to allowing the lesser to assert control over them through asking for money, spending time together, other favours. But in the world of the mid-ranger, because this is what the mid-ranger wants, he or she feels like they have got the control over the lesser. And at this juncture, the relationship was actually working. The lesser asserts control by obtaining the money, the status, therefore no threat to control. The mid-ranger is content to provide those things, thus believing themselves to be in control for their gain of bringing the lesser within as an inner circle friend to then capitalise upon that at a later juncture. So far, so undramatic. Both are actually able to assert control over one another. But it is when the mid-range narcissist expects to cash in on their generosity, as I've explained, the problems begin. The mid-ranger will then instinctively start to manipulate the lesser to do things for him or her. The lesser, of course, might do this at first because their lens of control basically says, do that, you'll get more money, and therefore they actually feel like they are the one controlling the mid-ranger. And this is where you can have a situation where two narcissists of differing schools, in this instance, actually appear to work together. However, the problem is that after a while, the lesser sense of entitlement means that he expects to be given these things from the mid-ranger and need not do anything in return. The mid-ranger asserts control by saying, you can have these things as long as you do these things for me. And of course, when the lesser decides no, that threatens the mid-ranger's control, and thus this is when the problems start. The lesser will reject the attempt at control and do so in a manner which of course provides the mid-ranger with fuel. The mid-ranger, pushed by his own sense of entitlement, expects the lesser to carry out his wishes based on past favours, and then will react in a feigned, manipulative, instinctive, hurtful manner to the lesser lashing out. With both expecting the other to do something based on either entitlement and or past investment, and not gain the required response, there will be a clash. The lesser will demand and the mid-ranger will back off. The likely withdrawal of the mid-range narcissist will cause the lesser to break off in a fury and cause a temporary cessation of the connection, as he then seeks out other friends to give him what he is entitled to. Most likely, non-narcissistic ones. The mid-range narcissist, hurt by this betrayal of friendship, will retreat and then smear the selfishness of the lesser to anybody who will listen, thus asserting control indirectly. Thus, the starting point of the relationship where you have a lesser narcissist and mid-range narcissist as friends, they actually coexist, but it won't last forever. They will not, however, disengage from one another because their narcissism still perceives that there is a useful need provided by the other one. The lesser sees the more successful mid-ranger as a provider of bounty to which he is entitled. The mid-ranger sees the lesser as a useful blunt instrument, a lieutenant or member of the coterie, one to which he is entitled. Unfortunately for them, this sense of entitlement means to a threat to one another's control and leads to them clashing, not bothering with one another after a flare-up, they're placed on the shelf, and then seeking one another out to hoover one another in, again drawn by the lure of the need to assert control and the perceived usefulness to one another. Naturally, there is fuel to be gathered into the bargain, but it is not as extensive as when dealing with an empathic individual, and therefore in this instance it's actually the residual benefits and character traits that are the main draw between the lesser and the mid-range in a social setting. Third parties will be dragged into their fallings out. The lesser will name-call the mid-range to provoke and attack verbally any other party who stands up for the mid-ranger. The mid-ranger will play the hard done to, doling out the pity parties to anybody who will listen, and then will manipulate them into trying to build a bridge again with the annoyed lesser. What about the situation where a lesser and a mid-range narcissist are drawn together through work? Again, this is a non-intimate scenario where there is a pre-existing connection between the two narcissists. Similar to the social setting that I've just described, the two narcissists will be looking to the other for control and fuel, and moreover the sequestration of residual benefits. The lesser will expect the mid-ranger to be doing him favours such as lessening his workload, supporting him for promotion or a pay rise, dealing out favourable work and such like, since the mid-ranger is, in all likelihood, going to hold a slightly superior position to the lesser. The mid-ranger will expect to lord it over the lesser and have him or her at the mid-ranger's beck and call. Thus, the lesser will regard any failure of the mid-ranger to show him or her favouritism as a threat to control. The lesser's fury will be ignited, and unable to keep it under control, he or she will lash out at the mid-ranger and others, causing disruption and potentially disciplinary action as the hurt mid-ranger goes to the hardly relevant department. If the lesser holds a superior role in the workplace, then he will expect the mid-ranger to be his lackey. He will delegate considerable amounts of work to the mid-ranger, who will consider himself being picked on and singled out. He will not dare to complain direct to the lesser, but instead will gossip to peers, complain to a different boss, and potentially raise matters via a grievance. The latter demands subservience from the mid-range narcissist as part of his ideal of control and omnipotence. The mid-ranger, considering himself above such menial activity and accountability, believes he is entitled to highlight the mean and unfair behaviour of the lesser narcissist, which of course is translating to a threat to control. The two will continue to churn out fuel for one another as they vie for control, with the lesser scathing attacks against the mid-ranger for daring to defy him, and with the mid-ranger responding by pleading with the lesser to leave him alone, or asking why he is insisting on making his life a misery. The two of them will certainly provide something to other employees, whilst causing consternation to those who have to work alongside them or regulate their behaviours. They will effectively fight with one another, vying for control, blaming and counter-blaming, neither ever being at fault, and it always being the fault of the other. In terms of tertiary source reaction, a mid-ranger is mainly likely to be pleasant to a lesser tertiary source and provide positive fuel, which the lesser will accept. A lesser, however, is more likely to be aggressive towards a mid-ranger or offend their readily offended sense of importance by pointing out that the mid-range tertiary source has done something wrong, which will result in the imposition of the withdrawal of services, which will in turn threaten the control of the narcissist who is lesser, ignite their fury and cause a sudden explosion. Any interaction will be short-lived, and will either be the provision of positive fuel, mid-range to lesser, or a burst of negative fuel, lesser to mid-ranger. Finally, what is the dynamic between a lesser narcissist and a mid-range narcissist in the context of a romantic relationship? The lesser, being the, generally speaking, least cognitive able, may well seek to seduce a mid-range narcissist. They won't see what this person is. The mid-range narcissist will evidence some charm towards the lesser, which will certainly appeal to the lesser narcissist, who will press on with the seduction in order to try and secure the mid-ranger. The mid-ranger, however, is likely to regard the lesser as not fulfilling the requisite empathic traits, instinctively picking up on this. Whilst the mid-ranger is not aware of specifically what he or she wants, he will have an instinctive awareness of the traits in a prospective romantic partner which, in effect, make him feel better through the provision of fuel and the assertion of control. These traits are explained in my book, Sitting Target. These traits will be absent in the lesser, because not only are the empathic traits absent, the lesser lacks the cunning and guile and the energy or inclination to feign them to any extensive degree which would satisfy the mid-ranger's needs. Thus, unless the mid-range narcissist is absolutely desperate for a primary source, he or she is unlikely to complete the seduction of a lesser as an intimate partner primary source. They will break off, go elsewhere, and reject the overtures of the lesser, deeming them in effect to not tick the right boxes. The lesser will not try to press the seduction, since this rejection by the mid-range narcissist will cause his fury to ignite as a consequence of being wounded and his low control threshold on his ignited fury. He will lash out at the mid-ranger and be forced to find a different primary source rather than selecting another narcissist. Thus, in most cases, the lesser will flare up as his seduction is derailed, and the mid-ranger will withdraw, training his or her sights elsewhere. Even if the lesser is in desperate straits to secure a primary source, he will not be able to ensnare the mid-range narcissist, who will find his or her own needs unmet. However, if the mid-ranger is the party which is desperate to find a primary source, they may settle for the lesser in such circumstances. Of course, the lesser will be content for this to happen, the increased level of charm and complementary behaviour of the mid-ranger satisfying, at least to begin with, the lesser's need for fuel. There are also likely to be character traits and residual benefits which will suit the needs of the lesser. Thus, if the lesser is the desperate party, but the mid-ranger is not, then the lesser will be denied. If the mid-ranger is the desperate party and the lesser is or is not, then it is more likely that the two will form a romantic couple, securing the other as the intimate partner primary source. In this scenario where there is a coupling, the absence of sufficient positive fuel provision will soon surface along with the repeated threats to control. The bronze period behaviour of the lesser will not suit the mid-range narcissist at all with regard to the assertion of control or fuel needs. The selfishness and self-centeredness of the mid-ranger will not suit the lesser either, amounting to a threat to control, and thereafter there will be a very swift devaluation following after seduction. However, this is where a further interesting dynamic will occur, because it is actually in devaluation that the pair will meet one another's needs for far longer than they did in seduction. The lesser narcissist, disappointed and indeed infuriated by the mid-ranger's threat to control and poor positive fuel provision, will commence the devaluation. Being on the attack, her angry words, her fury, her nastiness will all be excellent fuel to the mid-ranger. He, of course, will not welcome the challenges made to him by the pointing finger and aggression of the lesser, but he won't be able to resist the tasty fuel which accompanies it, and, of course, his narcissism will be wanting him to assert control over the lesser. He will lap up the fuel provided by her, whilst responding with his own instinctive manipulations to keep her under control or get her under control. He will blame shift, deny and deflect, refuse to cooperate. He will roll out the pity plays, beg with the lesser to stop the hurtful behaviour and so forth, all of which will then provide excellent fuel to the lesser, even though control is being threatened. Because they're both fueling one another to such a degree and still fighting to assert control, this fuel will allow them to keep going at one another for a longer period. Back and forth they go, cat playing with mouse, mouse evading cat, in a scenario which causes them to provide sufficient negative fuel to one another so they're extremely well fueled. The only issue is they keep fighting to assert control because both of them keep threatening it. Therefore, the mid-ranger may well then turn to third parties, as is his wont, to indirectly assert control, instinctively pointing out the horrible behaviour of the lesser. Of course, such action is a threat to the control of the lesser, and she will respond with further nasty direct behaviours, and may then start to seek out a new primary source, since devaluation is well advanced. If the lesser finds an intimate partner secondary source, which becomes a potential new primary source, news of her behaviour reaches the mid-ranger, either from third parties or, more likely, from the less than subtle lesser herself carrying out this affair in full view, and this of course wounds the mid-ranger. Such wounding will be significant, and the mid-range narcissist will then flounce off in a silent treatment, and, in so doing, as asserting ad control, look to find his own replacement primary source because of the unreliable, malfunctioning lesser. The lesser won't respond to the silent treatment. He will respond with his own response of withdrawal and instead focus on the new primary source instead. The mid-ranger sees that the silent treatment has had no effect, will then hoover the lesser back in. This appeals to the lesser, as she believes that she now has the upper hand, the hoover telling her that she has control. Although the mid-ranger will believe that he has it because he has caused the lesser to engage again. Their narcissistic perspectives are working in favour of them whilst working against them. Thus, they are then brought together again for a brief respite period. Of course, neither will then provide sufficient positive fuel, both will challenge one another's control, and therefore they will soon slump into devaluation again. This can go back and forth for some time. The death knell for this intimate relationship between the lesser and mid-range narcissist is when they both commence their search for a new primary source and they then find a suitable prospect. Up until that point, the negative fuel provided through devaluation is maintaining their required fuel levels, enabling to fight the threat to control because of the contrast. something, as you know, which is always required by our kind, between their respective styles, the aggressive lesser and the passive-aggressive mid-range narcissist. Thus, the devaluation can go on for some time, but once one or both of these narcissists turns their attention to a candidate intimate partner secondary source, then the end of the relationship is in the post. Either one or both will ensnare a non-narcissist, and the fuel provision from this individual as an empathic individual and the fact that they will not be threatening control will then mean the narcissist will focus on that person and there'll be a disengagement trigger. The narcissist will disengage from the other narcissist, installing the candidate as the new primary source, and the dynamic then ends. Of course, until such time as they hoover, when they devalue the new empathic victim. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.